So some of my fondest memories in the church were my days in the young men's program, and specifically the high adventure trips we would do each year in my stake. Even my friends and relatives who have left the church can't help but smile remembering those activities and mourn the fact that their children won't get that experience of friendship, community, and bonding. The reality is that all over society, people are talking about how our digital age increasingly is leaving people feeling isolated. People both inside and outside of the church are longing for human connection. And there are significant negative mental health effects that happen when people feel isolated, especially among the youth. I often think about John 17 and Jesus' desire for us to be one as he and the Father are one. When you think about it, at the heart of the gospel is the idea of connection. A connection with God, for sure, but also a connection with one another. Love is ultimately a type of connection with another person. And as any missionary knows, it is often a connection with another person that leads a convert to connect with the Savior. Now, I have worked in the Young Men's program in the church for well over a decade, and the Young Men's program today is radically different from what it was when I first started as a Young Men's president. And in some ways, it's nice that there's a greater degree of freedom and a less structured program, but also the lack of structure and guidance has left many leaders not quite sure what they should do. Also, anyone who has worked with youth in the church knows that one of the challenges we all face is that of different interests. For example, you might have 5 to 10 young men in your quorum, and some boys might be really into sports, where another might be more into band and music, while another is just a hardcore gamer who loves nothing more than to talk about Minecraft. Now, in one sense, it's very good for these boys to be together with kids that maybe aren't the ones they normally would hang out with. However, it can also create an enormous challenge in creating activities that all the boys will actually enjoy. So the other day, I was thinking about how we might be able to solve this age-old problem. And so I began imagining what it might be like to have interest-based activities that could happen with some level of regularity at the stake level rather than at the ward level. Here's what I mean. Let's imagine a stake president that tells the members of his stake that he is looking for people willing to lead either a monthly or quarterly activity based around something they have a particular passion for. And let's say there's a couple in the stake that love theater. They then go and get another couple in the stake that they did drama club with in college, and they come to the stake president explaining that they would be willing to put on an annual youth play and propose that this year they want to do the classic play Annie. So with the stake president's approval, they get to work. But it's not really work, because these leaders are almost more excited about it than the kids. So they have auditions and they put together a great crew of youth actors and adults to help make the stake play happen. Now imagine the experience for this 20 to 30 youth as they do a series of rehearsals, etc., and they bond and make new friendships with other kids in their stake who love theater. Suddenly the kids who are not into the stake basketball program feel included and appreciated. They find kids who not only share their values, but who also share their interests. Also, let's just imagine that they got 3 non-member kids involved in this. And think about the great experience they're going to have as they're invited to join and be a part of this team preparing for the big show. Think of the gym at the Stake Center, filled with people who come to one of the 2 nights that they perform the show. Think of the mini celebrity status these kids would get to enjoy for a few weeks after the big show. Think of the quality of the production you would have if you have a group of people who are really passionate about it. Now imagine that after the last show, they have a cast and crew party where they get together with some games. And then at the end of the night, they all get the chance to bear their testimonies to each other. And then, when all is said and done, they sing "God Be With You Till We Meet Again" before closing out this final meeting and gathering of their group with a prayer. Think about how powerful this experience would be for all the kids, and especially those 3 non-member kids. Now, before you go thinking that this is some kind of just fantasy idea, Keep in mind that my uncle actually did something very similar to this. And now, over a decade later, all of the participants still talk about it. Are you starting to see where this is going? Now let's imagine that there are 3 or 4 active, adventurous men that came to that same stake president and offered to put together a young men's adventure group for boys 15 and older. They tell the stake president that the group would have 2 high adventure activities a year and then 2 or 3 overnight outdoor education workshops as well. And in order for the young men to go on the high adventure outings, the young men would have to complete the required preparatory workshops. I can think of all sorts of young men who would love to be part of a stake outdoor adventure group led by cool, adventurous Latter-day Saint men. And I can think of a lot of local ward leaders who would be relieved that they don't have to plan the high adventure trip, but rather would be able to just go along and support their boys. I also imagine the young men would be more than willing to invite their adventure-prone friends to join in on the fun. Also, have you ever heard young women be bothered that they don't get to do some of these high adventure activities that the young men get to do? Well, why not allow some of the outdoor-oriented women in the stake to start a young women's adventure group so that young women who are inclined to outdoor adventures would be able to be led by faithful, adventurous, outdoors-oriented women? When you put together a group of Latter-day Saint women who all share a passion for the outdoors, I can only imagine the sort of experiences and connections that will emerge. And when you have that devotional on the last night, and that girl who has been struggling with her faith hears several of her new friends testify of the Savior, I can only imagine the power that that would have. You see, as I continued pondering and thinking about this idea, I began to realize it doesn't just apply to the youth. For example, when my wife and I first moved to Reno, my wife didn't really know anyone, and she found a couple of friends in her Relief Society, but the vast majority of the women in the ward were far older than her or simply had very different interests. However, my wife was invited by a friend to a popular Baptist church in the area that put on a monthly night for mothers of young children. At these activities, young moms would get to meet other young mothers. They would have get-to-know-you activities. They'd have food. They'd listen to a speaker who talked about issues relevant to young moms. The Moms Connect group, which is what it was called, was the primary way my wife found friends when she first moved to Reno. These women would bond, set up play dates, socialize, and feel a little less alone as they dealt with the challenges that young moms face. I couldn't help but be impressed by this interest-based program and thought, how I wish that our stake had something like that for young moms. The principle here, the simple reality, is that people bond most with people who share not only their values, but also their interests. It's true that within the church, it's very easy to find people who share your values, and we love that. But often at the ward level, you just can't find a lot of people that share your same interests. And so people end up at the ward level with a lot of cordial relationships, but not the kind of relationships where you are hanging out in your free time. I can't help but feel that Zion is meant to be more than just a bunch of cordial relationships. However, if you were to zoom out to the stake level or even to a regional level, you could find groups of saints that certainly share similar interests and passions. And when you have people together who share similar values, engaging in a shared passion, the results can be magical. Now, this is not to discount the importance of the ward, but it all depends on what kind of activity. Just look at what works. At the ward level, a youth temple trip, or a service project, or a trunk or treat party works amazingly well. But what about a basketball game? We all know that some of the kids are embarrassed to even try to play basketball because they're just not good at it and are not interested in the sport. So why force activities at the ward level that can be done at a different level more effectively? Sure, we all want to try and push kids to try new things, but there are just some activities that are not going to be for everyone. And so often at the ward level, we don't do these activities, and we create sort of generic activities that don't evoke a lot of passion or excitement. If you really want people to connect with one another, you find people who share similar passions, and you put them together in some sort of an endeavor or activity based on that passion. Just think about the people who you like to hang out with most in your free time. They are probably people who share your interests and your values. And you love it most when you're hanging out with them, doing something you're all passionate about. And this is how human connections are made. This is why a young man feels more brotherhood with his football team than he does with his priest quorum. His priest quorum is filled with kids that share his values, but they may not share his interests. Now, on the other hand, the people on his football team share his interests, but they may not share his values. And the real magic happens when you have people who share similar values and interests. That's why at BYU Hawaii, I made some of my best friends to this day. It's a bunch of guys who loved the gospel, but who also loved to surf. I graduated college over a decade ago, and just last month, I went on a surf trip down the Baja coast with this same group of friends. And we still do the same things when we get together. We have a blast surfing, and we sit around campfires where, when we're not making jokes, the conversation is often about the gospel. Now, before we go too far, I recognize that this vision can seem overwhelming. I mean, there are literally endless possibilities here, with everything from a youth ballroom dance program to a stake book club. And I'm not naive. I have worked in church leadership. I know how much they all have on their plate, and I can hear leaders watching this saying, this all sounds great, but leaders are already swamped with a million things. So I totally hear this. I get that. But I want to suggest that this actually is something already going on in our stakes and will require actually very little from stake leaders and could even possibly reduce their workload. So here's what I'm getting at. The basic idea is that this would be a bottom-up approach. Do members need to be commanded in all things from the top down? You see, instead of imposing a program on the stake, you simply ask members what they're passionate about. There are people in every stake of the church who would love to gather with fellow saints around a particular passion. These people will surprise you with their creativity and willingness to handle the legwork when they're dealing with something that they're passionate about. And if you think about it, this already happens in the church. You don't have to impose the early morning basketball at 6 a.m. at the stake center. The guys who love to play basketball come and ask if they can do this. Ultimately, this is the same sort of concept. It's just a little more organized. And this does not have to be huge. It could be as big or as small as a stake is willing to make it. And I think that stakes or regions should start small. Now, as with any activity, there will be some logistics that need to be sorted out. But these sorts of things can be sorted out, and it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, what's stopping the stake from having a monthly ladies' yoga night? Or to put on an annual stake play? Or to create a stake hiking club? Or an annual pickleball or tennis tournament? By the way, my father-in-law would love a stake tennis tournament. You see, these would not take a lot of work from the stake leaders because people will willingly organize and run these programs because they are already passionate about them. And while this may feel like something new, it's not. Stake activities are something that stakes are supposed to do. And we already do or have done these kinds of things in many stakes in the church. This video is just about encouraging us to focus on what actually has worked and to capitalize on it. Also, it's about reducing legwork. You see, in a bottom-up approach, leaders can harness the creativity and willingness of the amazing people in the church. I could envision the stake having a simple proposal form that people could fill out if they wanted to form one of these groups. On the proposal, they would just have to include things like the 3 people that were going to lead the program, an outline for what the program would entail, and how they would incorporate the gospel into it, etc. Then the stake each year could select some number of these that they feel would particularly benefit the needs of the stake. Anyway, I'm not here to prescribe exactly how this would work, as each stake is different. But if each stake is already tasked with creating activities, why take on the major legwork of imposing activities from the top down instead of utilizing people who are already motivated from the bottom up? Also, think about this sort of thing from a missionary perspective. Missionary work can be very challenging in the Western world these days, and we're always trying to find new ways to interact with people who aren't members of the church. And I can tell you right now that people outside of the church in today's society are looking for community and connection. There are thousands upon thousands of non-members and less active members in every stake who share in these interests already. And if we invited them, they would join us. With an interest-based program, inviting those who are not of our faith or someone who is not active would be super easy instead of awkward. We could even invite non-members to run these activities or programs. One of my good friends joined the church because he was invited to help lead the young men activities that his son was participating in our ward. I mean, it would be extremely easy for me to ask a neighbor who loves to rock climb and has been doing it his whole life to help us plan and run a couple of rock climbing events for our stake rock climbing group. We should not forget that non-members are also looking for ways to serve and share their talents. And what about less active members? Or that guy who sits in the back of elders quorum and never participates much, but who we all know loves fly fishing. Imagine how much he would enjoy the annual stake fly fishing derby hosted each summer by the stake fishing group. And think about how he'd feel having his picture holding the winning fish posted in the stake center bulletin board. Think of how much this could help this man find connection with his brethren in the church. The reality is that in every stake of the church, there are a lot of people who feel like they don't fit in, who feel disconnected, and are struggling with the mental and spiritual consequences of that isolation. How do we create belonging in the church? Do we just talk about it? Tell people they belong? I think actions speak louder than words, but I also think that we struggle to know what actions we can take. Maybe we should start by asking ourselves, what makes these lost sheep come alive? After all, everyone has a passion for something. You see, the real reason for creating interest-based programs at the stake or regional levels is the idea that human connection happens at the intersection of interest and values. Nothing invites the Spirit more than human connection, because human connection ultimately is love. And love is the essence of the Spirit that brings people to Christ. And even though baptizing people would be amazing and likely would result from these programs, the goal of the programs would not be some ploy to convert people. Ultimately, we don't convert people. The Spirit does. We are just here to bring the Spirit into people's lives, and human connection does that. And we all know this. The church is seeking to gather Israel. It's trying to create belonging. It's trying to strengthen families and communities. It's seeking to do missionary work. It's seeking to bring back those who have strayed. It's trying to create a home-centered, church-supported culture. It's seeking to minister to people who feel like they don't fit in. It's seeking to build Zion and transcend the divisions. I can't help but feel that interest-based programs like a stake adventure group or a young moms club would help accomplish all of these missions. And largely, that is because they already have. When you look at the programs inside and even outside of the church that are successful, it's generally because the people leading them and participating in them are genuinely interested in it. And these sorts of programs are the things we all remember with fondness when we think of our experiences in the church. One of the defining features of the Latter-day Saints is that we are a people, a group who have formed a real community that goes beyond mere cordial Sunday acquaintances. I think if we were to look at what has worked in the church and expand it, we would foster a renewed sense of community among the saints, the kind of community identity that has long defined us throughout our history. Being a unique and special community is something in our history that we have done so well. But are we more of a community of saints now than we were 50 years ago? People in the 21st century are longing for community and connection, and our call from the prophet is to gather scattered Israel. He has told us that nothing is more important than that work. Now, I put out a lot of ideas in this video, and I want to end by saying I am not here prescribing any sort of an exact program. Every stake in the church is different, and ultimately it is up to local leaders to determine the specifics of how to build the kingdom within their various situations. My hope in this video is just to testify of principles that I have personally seen work in moving wards and stakes closer to Zion. Ultimately, it is the local key holders who must seek the Lord's guidance for how to build the kingdom within their stewardships. And I completely recognize and respect the authority of local leaders to make these decisions. I only share this as a fellow saint, hoping to help provide a paradigm for how we might more effectively create connections, community, and belonging as we work to gather scattered Israel. So feel free to share this video with anyone that you believe might find it useful. And may God be with us as we all seek to build his kingdom. So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.